The mountain pass had a name, but no one used it anymore. On maps it appeared as a thin white slash cutting through the Rockies, an old supply route carved decades earlier and barely maintained. To the soldiers watching the live satellite feed, it looked less like a road and more like a scar, narrow, exposed, and bleeding danger from every angle. For 3 days straight, a winter storm had locked it in ice, sealing a civilian convoy inside like insects trapped in amber. Inside the command center at Fort Carson, Colorado, the air was tense and stale. Coffee cups sat untouched. Boots were planted shoulder-width apart as officers stared at the screens in silence. Trucks loaded with medical supplies, fuel, and families fleeing a nearby conflict zone were stranded halfway through the pass. Engines were dead. Temperatures had dropped to -20. Children were running out of blankets. And somewhere above them, hidden in the white silence of the mountains, enemy fighters had taken position. "They know the road better than we do," one intelligence officer muttered, zooming in on a grainy image. "They're waiting for daylight." Everyone in the room knew what that meant. At first light, the convoy would be visible from every ridge line. The road curved tightly between two cliffs, offering no cover and no room to turn around. Any rescue attempt by ground would be shredded before it reached the first bend. Air support had already been ruled out. The wind shear was too violent, the visibility too unstable. Even drones struggled to stay aloft. A colonel cleared his throat and finally said what everyone was thinking. "There is no clean solution here." No one argued. The plan, if it could be called that, was to wait, monitor, and hope the enemy hesitated. But hope was not a strategy, and the people trapped below didn't have time for hesitation. Frostbite was already setting in. A medic on board one of the trucks had reported a child with hypothermia 20 minutes earlier. "Snipers," someone suggested weakly. The colonel shook his head. "Too many angles, too much wind. One shooter can't cover that pass." The room fell silent again. That was when Captain Mara Hale stood up. She hadn't spoken all night. She sat at the edge of the room, back straight, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the screen as if memorizing every contour of the mountain. Her uniform was immaculate, her hair pulled back tight, her expression unreadable. To most in the room, she was just another sniper, experienced, respected, but still bound by physics and probability. But those who knew her history watched closely. "I can," she said calmly. Every head turned. The colonel frowned. "Captain, with all due respect." "I've trained at altitude higher than this pass," Mara continued, her voice steady. "I've competed in crosswinds stronger than what you're seeing on those sensors. And that road," she pointed to the screen, "it's a funnel. They think they own it because no one's challenged it yet." A younger officer scoffed under his breath. "This isn't the Olympics." Mara's jaw tightened, but she didn't look at him. "No," she said quietly, "it's worse." The colonel studied her for a long moment. He knew her file: former Olympic biathlete, gold medal contender before she walked away from international fame and enlisted, multiple confirmed Overwatch saves overseas, calm under fire to a degree that unnerved even veterans. But this was different. "One rifle doesn't change terrain," he said. Mara finally met his eyes. "No, but it changes decisions." She stepped closer to the screen and tapped a ridge line barely visible under snow cover. "They're not evenly spread. They're clustered here and here, watching the choke points. If those positions go quiet fast enough, confusion sets in. Confusion buys time. Time lets the convoy move." "And if you miss?" someone asked. Mara didn't answer immediately. She zoomed in further, revealing the steep slope above the pass. "Then the mountain decides." The implication landed hard. One misplaced round, one shockwave in the wrong place. An avalanche could bury the road and everyone on it. "Captain," the colonel said carefully, "this is not a suicide mission, but it is close." Mara nodded once. "I know." The room waited for her to say more. She didn't. She didn't plead, didn't dramatize. She simply stood there, offering herself to the impossible like it was just another calculation. Outside, wind howled against the concrete walls of the base, as if the mountain itself was listening. "How would you insert?" the colonel finally asked. "High-altitude drop," Mara replied. "2 clicks west of the ridge. I hike in before dawn. No extraction until the convoy is clear." "That puts you alone," the colonel said. Mara allowed herself a thin smile. "That's usually how it works." Silence stretched again. The screens flickered. On one feed, a woman in the convoy wrapped her coat tighter around a child and looked up at the cliffs, eyes wide with fear. The colonel exhaled slowly. "If we do this," he said, "and it goes wrong." "It won't be on you," Mara said. "I volunteered." She reached for her gloves, already preparing herself. At last the colonel nodded. "Prep a bird." The decision rippled through the room. Radios crackled. Orders were issued. Medics moved. Someone whispered, "God help her." Mara walked out without another word. An hour later, the helicopter lifted into the storm, rotors fighting the wind as snow lashed against the hull. Inside, Mara checked her rifle one final time, fingers moving with practiced precision despite the cold creeping in. She closed her eyes briefly, not to pray but to visualize. Wind vectors, elevation, distance, breath. When the jump light flashed green, the crew chief hesitated. "Captain," he said, raising his voice over the roar, "no one would blame you if you backed out." Mara looked at him, eyes clear and unwavering. Someone waiting down there. Then she stepped into the void. As the helicopter disappeared into the storm behind her, Mara dropped toward the frozen mountain alone, unaware that the path she was about to fight for had already begun to shift, silently preparing to test every decision she was about to make. The cold hit first, violent and immediate. It clawed through Mara Hale's suit the instant the parachute snapped open, stealing warmth with a cruelty that felt personal. Below her, the mountain rose like a frozen ocean, jagged peaks rolling endlessly into darkness. The helicopter was already gone, swallowed by cloud and wind, leaving behind nothing but the hiss of snow and the steady thud of her own heartbeat. She landed hard. Snow exploded around her as she hit the slope, sliding several feet before her boots dug in. Mara rolled instinctively, absorbing the impact, rifle cradled tight to her chest. She stayed still for a full 10 seconds, listening. Wind, nothing else. No voices, no movement. Good. She checked her altitude gauge, higher than planned. "Figures," she muttered into the mic. The storm had pushed her off target. Not dangerously so, but enough to turn a calculated hike into something far more punishing. The ridge she needed was still miles away, and every step at this elevation felt like dragging a weight uphill through glue. Oxygen thinned the air, and each breath burned her lungs with icy needles. Mara began moving. She climbed diagonally, avoiding the steepest faces, planting her boots carefully to minimize vibration. The snowpack was deceptive, solid on the surface, unstable beneath. She tested every step with the butt of her rifle, distributing her weight like she'd been taught years earlier in survival training. Back then, instructors had shouted warnings over calm mountains under blue skies. This mountain offered no such mercy. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time lost meaning as her world narrowed to breath, balance, and pain. Frost clung to her lashes. Her fingers ached despite the heated gloves, numbness creeping in slowly, threatening mistakes she couldn't afford. Below her, the mountain pass finally came into view. It was worse than the feed had shown. The road was barely visible, swallowed by snowdrifts and shadow. Trucks were clustered tightly together, their white roofs blending into the landscape. She zoomed her scope, heart tightening as she saw figures moving between vehicles, parents packing, drivers arguing, children wrapped in whatever they could find. Exhaust plumes rose weakly, engines long dead. Then she saw the enemy. White camo, smart placement. They weren't spread evenly. They didn't need to be. They controlled the curves, the choke points, the places where the road narrowed so tightly that vehicles could only move single file. She counted at least 9 confirmed positions within seconds. 9 was too many. Mara ducked behind a rock outcrop and slowed her breathing. Panic was useless. Fear was manageable. She adjusted her scope, scanning farther out. That was when she noticed something else, tracks, fresh ones, leading uphill. Her stomach tightened. Someone else was on the mountain. "Command," she whispered into the radio. "I'm seeing additional movement above the pass. Possible secondary unit." Static crackled, then a response. "Copy, Captain. We don't have eyes on any friendlies in your area." So either the enemy had scouts positioned higher than expected, or someone had moved after the satellite pass. Neither option was good. Mara continued climbing, angling toward a narrow ledge she'd identified earlier. It offered a clear line of sight down the road, but little cover. Wind tore across it violently, threatening to knock her sideways. She crawled the last few yards on her stomach, pressing her body flat against the ice. When she finally settled into position, her muscles screamed in protest. She peeked through the scope again. One of the enemy fighters stepped out from behind a rock, rifle slung casually, posture relaxed. He wasn't worried. That bothered her more than aggression ever could. Confident men made fewer mistakes. Mara adjusted for wind, then again, then again. The gusts were unpredictable, slamming sideways without warning. She waited, finger resting lightly against the trigger, refusing to rush. Below, a child cried. The sound carried faintly, stolen by the wind. Her jaw clenched. Then her radio crackled. "Captain," command said, voice tight. "We're picking up a heat signature moving toward your ridge. Unknown, distance closing." Mara's heart rate spiked. "Direction," she whispered. "Northwest, slow, deliberate." Someone was hunting her. She scanned quickly, pulse hammering in her ears. Snow ridges, rock shadows, nothing obvious. Whoever it was knew how to move. Below, the enemy fighter lifted his rifle and aimed down the road. Another followed. They were preparing to test the convoy's response. Maybe a warning shot, maybe worse. Mara didn't have time for both problems. She centered her scope on the first target. Her breathing slowed despite the chaos building inside her chest. She had trained for moments like this, moments where the world narrowed to a single decision. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked, sharp and violent. The shot cracked through the air, echoing off the cliffs like thunder. The fighter dropped instantly, body collapsing into the snow. For half a second, everything froze. Then hell broke loose. Enemy fighters scattered, shouting, weapons snapping upward. Muzzle flashes burst from the ridges below as they fired blindly toward her position. Bullets smashed into rock, ice exploding inches from her face. Mara rolled hard, heart pounding, snow spraying as she shifted positions. She fired again, and again. Each shot precise, lethal. 2 more figures went down before the enemy realized what was happening. But the damage was done. She had revealed herself. Her radio exploded with overlapping voices. "Captain, you're lit up, fall back. We're seeing return fire." Mara, respond. She ignored them. Her ammo count dropped faster than she liked. Wind shoved at her relentlessly, throwing off calculations she normally trusted with her life. Below, enemy fighters began coordinating, spreading out, trying to flank uphill. And then she felt it. A vibration beneath her chest. Subtle but unmistakable. Mara froze, pressing her palm into the snow. Another tremor followed, deeper this time, rolling through the ridge like a warning growl. The mountain was shifting. She looked down the scope again, pulse racing, and saw something that made her blood run cold. A heavier figure emerging from cover below, gesturing sharply, directing the others with confident authority. The commander. If he finished organizing them, The convoy was done. Mara adjusted her scope, hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the realization settling heavily in her chest. She had one clear shot left from this position. And if she took it, the mountain might answer in a way she couldn't stop. As she lined up the commander in her crosshairs, another gunshot cracked from somewhere above her ridge, close enough to send ice spraying past her face. Mara spun toward the sound, heart slamming into her ribs. She wasn't alone on the mountain anymore. And whoever had just fired wasn't aiming at the convoy. The bullet that struck the rock above Mara's head wasn't meant to miss. Ice shattered, fragments slicing across her cheek as she flattened herself against the slope. Her heart slammed so hard it drowned out the wind. That shot hadn't come from below. It hadn't come from the pass. It had come from behind her. Mara rolled, rifle snapping up as she scanned the ridge line uphill. White, rock, shadow, nothing moved, but she could feel it now. The pressure of being watched. The kind that tightened the spine and sharpened instinct into something almost painful. "Command," she whispered, forcing calm into her voice. "I've taken fire from higher ground. Repeat, higher ground." Static, then, "Copy, Captain. No friendly units in that sector." So it was enemy. And that meant they'd anticipated a sniper. She crawled sideways, dragging herself into a shallow depression just as another round cracked past her previous position. Too close, too accurate. Whoever was up there wasn't guessing. They were calculating. Mara's mind raced. 2 fronts, limited ammo, unstable snowpack, a convoy of civilians counting on her not to hesitate. Below, gunfire intensified. Enemy fighters fired in controlled bursts now, less frantic, more disciplined. The commander had regained control. Mara peeked through her scope just long enough to confirm it. He was still alive, barking orders, repositioning men with sharp gestures. Time was bleeding out. She switched to a lower profile, pressing her body flat, breathing slow. Every instinct screamed to deal with the shooter behind her first. A sniper hunting a sniper was always priority. But if she turned her focus uphill, the convoy would pay the price. Mara made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. She ignored the threat behind her. Instead, she crawled inches forward, snow whispering beneath her until the commander filled her scope again. Wind shoved hard from the left, then died suddenly. Her calculations shifted rapidly in her head: distance, drop, crosswind, decay. Another shot cracked behind her, this one closer still. Her teeth clenched. The commander raised his arm, fingers splayed, the signal to advance. Mara exhaled. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle roared, recoil biting into her shoulder. Through the scope, she watched the round strike center mass. The commander staggered, surprise flashing across his face for a fraction of a second before he collapsed backward into the snow. Chaos erupted instantly. Enemy fighters shouted, some firing wildly, others dropping low, unsure who was in charge now. Confusion rippled through their ranks just as Mara had predicted. But the mountain didn't care about tactics. The shot's concussion rippled outward, and the snow beneath Mara's chest shifted violently. A deep, resonant whump rolled through the slope, the sound every mountaineer feared. The snowpack fractured. Mara's stomach dropped. "No, no," she whispered, scrambling backward as a slab of snow broke loose below her, sliding downward in a slow, terrifying wave. It wasn't a full avalanche, not yet, but it was enough to destabilize everything. Below, fighters yelled in panic as the ground beneath them began to move. Some slipped. Others fired blindly as they scrambled for footing. The convoy screamed. Mara saw trucks rocking as snow poured across the road, burying tires, blocking any immediate escape. Children clung to parents. Drivers slammed doors shut. Fear spread faster than the snow. And then the sniper behind her fired again. This time, the round tore through her pack. Mara gasped as she felt the impact, heat flaring across her back. She rolled hard, adrenaline drowning out pain as she checked herself quickly. No penetration. The round had struck equipment. She was still intact. Barely. She spun, rifle trained uphill now, eyes scanning desperately. There, movement. A flicker of white shifting against rock. The enemy sniper was repositioning, using the chaos below as cover. "Command," Mara said urgently, breath ragged. "I'm compromised. Enemy sniper above me. Snowpack unstable, I need." Another shot cut her off. This one struck her rifle. Metal rang sharply, the scope shattering in a spray of glass. The force knocked the weapon from her hands, sending it skidding downslope. Mara stared after it in disbelief as it disappeared into drifting snow. Her rifle was gone. For the first time since the mission began, fear punched through her composure. She was a sniper without a rifle, alone on a mountain that was actively trying to kill her, with civilians still trapped below, and an enemy sniper hunting her from above. She forced herself to breathe. Panic was death. She crawled toward a rock outcrop, using elbows and knees, ignoring the fire ripping into the snow around her. Each movement sent fresh tremors through the slope. The mountain groaned like a living thing. She reached the rocks and pressed herself against them, chest heaving. She ripped her sidearm free, knowing it was useless at this range, but better than nothing. Her eyes scanned the ridge above again. The shooter had stopped firing. That was worse. Snipers didn't stop unless they were moving or waiting. Below, the enemy fighters were retreating in disarray, leaderless and terrified by the shifting mountain. Some fled upslope. Others ran toward cover farther down the pass. The convoy, though shaken, was still alive. But alive didn't mean safe. Mara activated her radio again. "Command, I've neutralized the commander. Enemy forces are breaking, but I've lost my primary weapon. I repeat, I've lost my rifle." Silence stretched for a beat too long. "Captain," the colonel's voice finally came through, tight with strain. "Extraction is impossible right now. Weather's worsening. You need to move to safer ground." Mara almost laughed. "There is no safer ground," she said quietly. The wind screamed suddenly, stronger than before, whipping snow into blinding sheets. Visibility dropped to nothing. The mountain rumbled again, deeper this time, the sound rolling through her bones. Mara pressed her forehead to the ice, eyes closed, thinking fast. She could try to descend, risk triggering a full slide. She could stay put, risk being flanked and executed. Or she could do something no one would recommend. She glanced uphill, toward where the enemy sniper had last been. "If you want me," she whispered under her breath, "you'll have to come get me." Mara unclipped her remaining gear, lightening her load. Then, deliberately, she kicked loose a small section of snow just below her position. The snow slid. The mountain responded with a warning roar. Somewhere above her she heard movement, fast now, urgent. The sniper was advancing. Mara set her jaw, sidearm ready, heart hammering as the slope beneath her began to give way in earnest. Because the next few seconds wouldn't just decide the mission. They would decide whether the mountain buried her story forever. The wind tore at Mara's body like a living predator, howling through the jagged ridges and whipping ice into her face. Each gust pushed her backward, forcing her to dig her fingers into the snow and rock just to stay upright. She could feel the slope shifting beneath her boots, fragile ice cracking quietly in warning, and she knew every second counted. Above her, the enemy sniper was moving, calculated, methodical, a shadow of death advancing slowly. Mara's sidearm offered little hope against that range, and her rifle was lost somewhere downslope in a drift of snow. The mountains had a rhythm, a pulse that only a few could read. Mara had learned it over the years, studying storms and avalanches, teaching herself to anticipate how snow and wind interacted with gravity. She could hear the subtle groan of the slope, feel the tremor through the soles of her boots. One misstep, and the mountain would act, sweeping her and everything below into white oblivion. She crawled sideways along a narrow ledge, pressed close to the rock, eyes flicking constantly. The enemy sniper had paused now, waiting, as if sensing her hesitation. Mara had no hesitation left. Every muscle screamed, every nerve burned, but she moved with precision, timing her breaths, letting the mountain's rhythm guide her. The convoy below shivered and huddled together, exposed but unaware that her every action might save or doom them. Her scope, shattered but still usable, caught fragments of movement. Enemy soldiers were regrouping, scrambling over snowdrifts and repositioning. They didn't know exactly where she was, but they felt her presence. Fear had begun to creep into their disciplined ranks. Mara counted heads and positions quickly, noting who had line of sight, who could be flanked, and where the gaps were forming. The mountain responded unpredictably. A gust slammed against her side, rocking her balance. She pressed herself flat, feeling snow slide beneath her. Tiny fissures spiderwebbed across the ice, threatening collapse. Mara's gut tightened. One miscalculation now could trigger a full-scale avalanche. She had seconds, maybe less. Her mind raced. There was a small cliff above her ridge, just wide enough for her to pivot into a better shooting angle, but crossing it would put her fully exposed, with nothing but air below and enemy rifles trained upward. She had to move. The wind screamed, slicing against her, demanding she stay still, but Mara made her decision. She lunged, rolling across the thin ledge, fists gripping snow and jagged rock. The movement caused a small cascade of ice and loose snow to slide downward, barely missing the convoy but sending enemy fighters scrambling. A sharp crack echoed in the mountains, the warning of the shifting slope. Mara pressed herself against the upper rock, catching her breath, listening. Above her, the enemy sniper had vanished from sight. Mara's instincts screamed they were flanking, finding a higher perch, preparing a final shot. Below her targets, the enemy commander's remaining men were pinned, disoriented, and cautious now. The chaos worked in her favor, but she could feel the mountain's anger, like a living force judging her every move. Her rifle was gone, but she still had a single choice. She needed a shot to break the enemy's organization completely. She couldn't pick them off one by one. The slope and wind made that impossible without risking the convoy. Her mind flashed back to years of biathlon training, precision, patience, intuition. She visualized the trajectory, adjusted for wind gusts, snow density, and elevation drop. Her sidearm wasn't enough, but she could improvise. The first figure appeared, moving too quickly, confident, oblivious to the threat Mara posed. She aimed, exhaled, and squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out, sharp and precise, striking true. The enemy froze, looking around, confusion spreading like wildfire. Mara used the distraction. Snow shifted beneath her boots, and she kicked a loose slab downward, sending ice crashing in a mini avalanche toward the nearest soldiers. Panic erupted. They were retreating, but not fast enough. Mara leapt from her perch, landing on the slope with a grunt. Her hands dug into snow and ice, keeping her from sliding down completely. She fired another improvised shot, taking down a soldier scrambling toward a vehicle. Wind ripped through the canyon, making it impossible to hear anything except the roar of the mountain and her own ragged breathing. She slid further down the slope, moving closer to the convoy, careful to avoid triggering a full avalanche. Enemy fighters tried to regroup, but their confidence had shattered. Mara could see them hesitating, glancing at each other for orders, their coordination slipping. Every instinct in her body screamed to keep pushing, to maintain control of the chaos, but her arms were shaking, muscles trembling from the altitude and exertion. A deep rumble rolled through the mountain. She froze, stomach knotting. That wasn't just shifting snow, something larger was moving. Ice and snow above the convoy were starting to fracture, responding to the chaos she'd created. A slab cracked free, tumbling slowly toward the road. Trucks rocked violently. Children screamed. Mara's eyes darted between the enemy and the innocent below. If she fired again, she could stop the commander's men, but the mountain might answer with an avalanche that could bury the convoy. If she hesitated, the remaining fighters could reorganize and execute them all. The wind shrieked, carrying the faint sound of snapping ice. Mara's finger hovered over her improvised trigger, mind calculating, heart pounding. Below, a small truck skidded slightly on ice, engine coughing but alive. She saw a mother lift her child protectively, eyes wide, breath fogging in the frozen air. Mara exhaled slowly, whispering a word she hadn't said in years: focus. She had one opportunity, one perfect window to take a decisive action. One shot could save or doom everyone. And as the mountain groaned and the wind pushed harder, she realized the impossible was no longer a calculation. It was coming alive beneath her. Because the next move she made would force the mountain itself to answer. And no one could predict how it would respond. The mountain wasn't patient. A deep, low rumble rolled through the ridge, vibrating through Mara's boots, her chest, even her teeth. She froze, eyes scanning the frozen slope, rifleless, sidearm clutched tightly, adrenaline cutting through the cold like a blade. Snow shifted beneath her fingers, subtle at first, like the pulse of something alive, then faster, heavier, louder. A wall of ice and powder separated from the upper slope, peeling away with terrifying slowness at first, but then gaining speed, the rumble swelling into a roar that vibrated through the canyon. Below, the convoy's vehicles rocked violently on the icy road. Some tires slipped on snow, sending trucks lurching toward each other. People screamed. Children clung to parents, the wind stealing their voices and tossing them into the icy air. The avalanche hadn't fully formed yet, but the warning was unmistakable. The mountain had begun to act. Mara's mind raced. Every instinct screamed she should retreat, climb higher, find safety. But higher ground was the enemy's territory now. Every calculation pointed to one undeniable fact: she could not abandon the convoy. Not now. Not after they'd relied on her. She adjusted her position, gripping ice and rock with hands nearly numb, knees digging in. Her sidearm was useless at this distance, but she could make the mountain a weapon. She visualized the slope, tracing the line the snow would follow, the path the avalanche would take if she nudged it strategically. One calculated impact, enough to bury the enemy and block the road, but not the civilians. Her eyes flicked to the enemy commander's remaining men. They had regrouped, their leader gone, confusion now creeping into their ranks. Some tried to retreat, others aimed rifles at the convoy, uncertain who was friend or foe. Mara counted heads, 7 remaining, each a threat to the trapped families below. She exhaled, mind clearing, and aimed the sidearm, not at them but at the snow and ice directly above a cluster of enemies. She fired a single, careful shot. The bullet struck a precarious overhang. Ice cracked, snow shifted. Mara held her breath. It worked. A slab of snow, massive enough to knock enemy fighters off their feet but carefully placed, slid down the slope. Soldiers scrambled, shouting in panic. 2 went down hard, buried up to their waists before clawing out. Others bolted to avoid the sliding wall. Mara gritted her teeth as she watched the chaos unfold. But the mountain had its own plans. A secondary fracture opened on the opposite side of the slope. The wind, now unpredictable and violent, pushed snow down in waves, each one heavier than the last. Mara's stomach dropped as she realized the first slab she had triggered might combine with the second, and if it did, the avalanche could reach the convoy. She had seconds to adjust. Mara slid toward a small rock outcrop, using it to redirect the momentum of falling snow. Her boots sank into ice. Her fingers bled from gripping the jagged rocks. Her muscles burned from the altitude and exertion, but she forced herself to stay calm, calculating angles, speed, and gravity with a focus that left no room for fear. Below, the convoy was moving cautiously, sensing danger but unsure from where it came. A truck driver hit the brakes suddenly, sending a cloud of snow into the air. Mara froze, heart in her throat, calculating trajectories, waiting for just the right moment. Then she saw it, the enemy commander's second-in-command, trying to rally the troops, signaling them to advance. Mara's pulse surged. She had one chance, one precise action to stop him without endangering the innocent below. She aimed the sidearm once more, firing at another weak overhang. Snow cracked and tumbled down, sending the second-in-command sliding backward into the first slab, which merged into a rolling cascade. The combined avalanche thundered toward the enemy positions, carrying rock and ice like a weapon of nature itself. Shouts echoed, muffled under the roar. Mara pressed herself against the rock, sweat and snow mingling on her brow, heart hammering with every vibration of the slope. She had bought the convoy precious seconds, but the mountain's wrath was far from over. A massive wall of snow now loomed above the road, threatening to crush anything in its path. Mara's calculations had to be perfect. One mistake, one wrong movement, and the avalanche could turn from controlled chaos into a total disaster. The civilians below were still exposed, just out of the initial impact, but time was slipping. Her mind raced through options. Retreat? Impossible. She had no rifle, the wind was lethal, and the enemy sniper above had vanished, but he hadn't given up. Attack? Only a calculated trigger of snow could finish the job. She had to guide the mountain as if it were an extension of her own body. The wind tore at her again, louder, more chaotic, sending snow blasting past her face. Mara held her ground, gritted her teeth, and prepared for the next action. She could feel the mountain responding to her, the layers of snow and ice shifting in rhythm. Below, the enemy soldiers were being buried, some struggling to climb out, others retreating in total panic. The convoy remained precariously safe, inches from catastrophe. Mara's breath fogged in the freezing air. Every second, every calculation, every tremor mattered. And then she noticed something worse. A new rumble, deeper and more ominous than before, rolled through the ridge, not from above, but from the mountain itself. Large chunks of snow on the far slope were beginning to fracture, and Mara realized with sudden, terrifying clarity, the avalanche she had triggered might merge with another natural fracture, creating a wall of snow and ice far larger than she could control. Her stomach dropped. The convoy, the enemy, and even she herself were now at the mercy of the mountain. Mara inhaled sharply, exhaled slowly, and whispered to herself, "Focus. You either control it or it controls everything." She tightened her gloves, repositioned herself for the impossible, and prepared for the shot that could decide not just the mission, but life and death for everyone below. The mountain waited. And so did she. The avalanche hit like a living thing. It began with a rumble, low and ominous, that rolled through Mara's bones and rattled the snowpack beneath her boots. Then it accelerated, a roaring wall of snow, ice, and debris cascading down the frozen slope. Snow exploded around her, and the world became a blur of white, a deafening chaos that swallowed sight, sound, and reason alike. The enemy soldiers she had been targeting were gone in seconds, buried under tons of snow or fleeing in panic. Screams echoed faintly through the storm, but the wind stole them almost immediately, leaving only the relentless roar. Mara's body hit the slope hard, snow smashing into her chest, legs, and face. Her rifle was gone, carried away by the sliding snow. She rolled instinctively to absorb the impact, grit and ice scraping her skin, but the avalanche didn't stop. It enveloped her, pushing her downward in a relentless, suffocating tide. Her sidearm was almost useless, rattling in her hand as snow pressed against her chest, forcing the air from her lungs. Each breath was a struggle, a battle against freezing cold and crushing weight. The avalanche buried her in a cloud of ice and snow, compressing her into the slope. Time lost meaning. Seconds stretched into minutes or maybe hours. She couldn't tell. Darkness pressed from all sides, white transforming into gray, then black as she was swallowed deeper. Her ears rang with the roar of moving ice. She felt herself slipping, sliding, tumbling with the mountain. And yet she survived. Some instinct, muscle memory, sheer will, or maybe luck kept her oriented, her arms pressed close to her body, carving air pockets in the snow around her. She kicked and clawed, hands raw and bleeding, lungs burning with every desperate gasp. The pressure was immense, heavy enough to make bones ache. Ice scraped against her scalp. She could feel her hair freeze to her gloves. Finally, after what felt like eternity, her hand broke through to air. She gasped, lungs screaming, clawing desperately at the ridge above her. Snow cascaded past her in miniature avalanches as she dug her way upward. Frost-bitten fingers bled as they scraped ice, but she didn't care. The mountain had tried to swallow her, and she wasn't finished yet. Above, the ridge now lay quiet. The snowstorm had calmed slightly, revealing glimpses of the convoy below. The vehicles were buried in drifting snow, engines sputtering weakly, but every single one was intact. Mothers held children close, faces streaked with frost and tears, watching the slopes above in disbelief. Mara's heart twisted. She had risked everything, and the civilians had survived. But she wasn't done. Her eyes scanned upward. Somewhere above, the enemy sniper had disappeared into the storm, but Mara didn't dare assume he was gone for good. The mountain had swallowed much of the battlefield, erasing tracks and cover, but it also concealed threats. She pulled herself higher, snow tumbling past her like liquid ice, feeling the mountain respond to her every movement. Command's voice came faintly through her radio, distorted by static. "Captain, status." Mara coughed, snow filling her mouth and nose. "Still alive," she rasped, shaking ice and debris from her hair. "Ridge is clear, convoy still intact, enemy neutralized or buried." "Understood," the colonel replied. "We can't get a bird in yet. Weather's unstable. Stay put until conditions improve." Mara didn't respond. She had no energy for words. She pulled herself along a narrow ledge, muscles screaming, lungs burning. Every step was calculated, every movement essential. She had survived the avalanche, but the mountain wasn't done with her yet. Snow above shifted again. A smaller fracture she hadn't noticed broke loose, sending a thin wall tumbling down the slope she had just crossed. Mara barely avoided being swept again, pressing herself flat against the rock. Her chest heaved, and she tasted blood from a cut on her lip. The avalanche had been merciless, but luck, or skill, had spared her life. The convoy below began moving cautiously. Engines roared weakly to life, tires crunching through icy drifts. Mara watched from her perch, calculating every potential hazard, knowing the mountain could strike again at any moment. Every vehicle that reached safety felt like a victory, and yet she knew it was temporary. The mountain had only just begun its test. Hours passed. Exhaustion gnawed at her bones. She dug her hands deeper into the snow, searching for a secure foothold, monitoring the slope for further fractures. The storm had reduced visibility to almost nothing, but she could sense the subtle vibrations in the ice. The mountain was alive, and it was patient. Through the swirling white, she saw movement below. Civilians stumbling across snowdrifts, pulling vehicles free, children shivering and clinging to parents. For a brief, heart-stopping moment, Mara allowed herself to hope. And then she noticed it. One of the trucks had hit a soft patch of ice, teetering dangerously close to the edge of a snow-covered cliff. The mother driving it panicked, spinning the wheel as the vehicle slid, tires unable to grip. Her heart lurched. One false movement and the convoy could be lost, even after surviving the avalanche. Mara didn't hesitate. She leapt from her perch, sliding down the slope toward the truck, fists digging into snow, breath ragged. Each second was a battle against both the mountain and the cold, against exhaustion and gravity. She reached the edge just in time to grab the hood, fingers frozen and numb, pulling with every ounce of strength she had left. The truck skidded to a halt. The mother's eyes met hers, wide with disbelief and terror. Mara barely managed a nod before scrambling back to higher ground, lungs on fire, snow tumbling past her like liquid ice. Behind her the slope had calmed, the mountain silent once more, but Mara knew the reprieve wouldn't last. She pressed herself against the rock, chest heaving, frost coating her hair and eyelashes. The convoy had survived. The enemy had been neutralized or buried, but she was alone. And somewhere above, she sensed the presence of the hidden sniper still waiting in the storm, patient, calculating. The mountain had tested her. And it wasn't finished yet. Mara pressed her hand into the snow, drawing energy from it, from the rock, from the cold. She would survive. She had to. Because below, the convoy depended on her, and the mountain wasn't done moving. Mara Hale finally collapsed against a jagged rock, chest heaving, snow and ice clinging to her gloves and hair. Her body felt like it had been broken and rebuilt several times over in the last hours, every muscle screaming, lungs on fire, fingers stiff with frostbite. The avalanche had buried the enemy, spared the convoy, and nearly buried her in the process. But the mountain still loomed, silent, watching, waiting. Below, the convoy was emerging from the storm, headlights cutting through the residual snow, engines sputtering but alive. Mara's eyes traced the vehicles one by one, trucks rocking slightly on icy patches, families huddled together, faces streaked with frost and tears. Mothers held children tight, fathers guided vehicles along the treacherous road, shouts muffled by the swirling snow. Some had frozen expressions of disbelief. They had survived what no one should have survived. Mara's heart twisted. She had risked everything for these people, yet no one would ever truly understand the scale of what had happened up here. The satellite feed, the reports, the footage, it would all say mission successful, minimal casualties. No one would see the frozen chaos, the enemy buried under tons of snow, the mountain itself responding to her calculated decisions. But Mara didn't have time to dwell. Her rifle was gone, destroyed in the first avalanche, and the enemy sniper hadn't been accounted for. She had seen the flicker of movement earlier, a shadow she could feel more than see, retreating into the ridges above. Whoever it was could still strike. She needed to signal command. Mara dug into her pack for her emergency beacon. It had survived the avalanche, battered but functional. She activated it, and a faint red light pulsed against the snow, invisible to anyone but satellites or helicopters searching from above. She exhaled slowly, relieved that at least someone knew she was alive. Minutes dragged into eternity. Then she heard the faint thump of helicopter rotors far above the clouds, muffled but unmistakable. The wind carried the sound toward her, distorted but real. She pushed herself to her feet, legs trembling, every step a battle against ice and exhaustion. She waved the beacon frantically, hoping the pilots could see it through the storm. Her mind raced with the events of the last hours. The enemy commander had been struck by her shot, his men scattered and partially buried in the avalanche. The secondary sniper, likely a scout or backup, had vanished after the initial shots, a ghost hiding in the ridges. And the convoy was still alive, but barely. Vehicles had been damaged, engines weak, and families shaken nearly to the breaking point. Mara slid carefully down toward the convoy, moving along the edge of the ridge. Snow continued to shift beneath her boots, ice fracturing softly, warning her of instability. She kept low, sidearm ready, eyes scanning every shadow. Every instinct screamed that the sniper above had given up yet. Her radio crackled again, distorted but clear enough to hear the colonel's voice. "Captain, we're tracking your beacon. Hold your position until we can get you out. Weather conditions are improving. Extraction will be difficult, but we'll get you." Mara nodded, even though he couldn't see her. She pressed herself into the snow, watching the convoy inch along the icy road below. Some vehicles had broken through deeper snowdrifts, others were barely moving. She spotted a child's small form pressed against a parent, tiny fingers gripping a frozen coat. She swallowed hard. Every decision she'd made had kept them alive. Every risk, every calculation, every moment she had stared into death itself on that ridge. Then something caught her eye. A figure moving on a higher ridge, partially hidden in snow and shadow. The sniper. Mara's pulse spiked. She had expected this moment, had trained for it, but adrenaline surged through her veins like fire. She was exhausted, rifleless, frostbitten, but she couldn't afford hesitation. The figure paused, scanning the slope below, rifle raised. The wind carried the faintest whisper of intent, calm, deliberate, patient. This was no impulsive soldier. This was a trained professional, waiting for her to make the first move. Mara pressed herself flat against the snow, assessing her options. She could try to climb higher for a better shot, but the mountain was unstable. She could try to descend, putting distance between herself and the sniper, but that would expose the convoy. She could improvise. Every decision had consequences measured in lives. She pulled a small survival flare from her pack, igniting it. The red light flared brilliantly against the snowstorm, drawing the sniper's attention upward. At the same moment, she kicked loose a section of ice from the ridge, sending it tumbling down toward a group of enemy positions left uncovered by the avalanche. The sudden motion forced the sniper to react, momentarily disrupting his aim. Mara didn't wait. She sprinted along the ridge toward a secondary outcrop, sliding through snow and ice, every movement precise despite exhaustion. The sniper fired, but the shot missed, burying itself harmlessly in snow a few feet away. Mara pressed forward, adrenaline drowning out pain, until she found a shallow depression in the ridge. From this position, she could see the convoy moving steadily now, engines roaring weakly, lights cutting through the storm. She could see the enemy soldiers buried, scattered, or retreating. The sniper had stopped advancing, waiting for her next move. Mara exhaled, frost fogging in front of her. Her body ached, her gloves were torn, her face frozen in spots, but she was alive. The convoy was alive, and now, finally, the mountain seemed to pause, as if giving her a brief moment to catch her breath. She activated her beacon fully, pulsing bright and steady into the storm. Seconds later, faint rotor sounds grew louder. Rescue helicopters were cutting through clouds, pilots following the signal, moving closer to the ridge. Mara allowed herself a rare moment to feel relief, though she didn't let it slow her down. She had survived avalanches, gunfire, freezing altitude, and a professional sniper hunting her from above. But extraction wasn't guaranteed. The mountain still threatened her footing, and the storm was far from over. She looked down at the convoy, now moving more confidently, and allowed a small, exhausted smile. She had guided them through the impossible. And yet Mara knew the mission wasn't over, not yet. Because above her, hidden in shadow, the sniper was still watching, waiting, calculating. And the mountain itself had more surprises to reveal. The rotors shook the ridge as the helicopters descended, blades chopping the storm into ribbons of wind and ice. Mara pressed herself flat against the rock, snow and ice clinging to her like armor, lungs burning with each ragged breath. The red pulse of her emergency beacon cut through the blizzard, guiding the pilots like a lighthouse in white chaos. For the first time since the mission began, she felt the possibility of survival, her own, and the convoy. Below, the convoy crept along the narrow, icy road, engines straining but alive. Families clung together, shivering, frozen fingers interlocked, eyes wide as they watched the snow-strewn mountains surrounding them. The trucks had survived the avalanche, but they were still vulnerable, trapped in a landscape that demanded respect, that punished hesitation. Mara's gaze swept across them, heart tight. Every calculation, every risk she had taken up here had been for them. She had carried them through death itself, and now they were so close to safety. Above her, the hidden sniper was still somewhere on the ridge, a ghost in white, calculating, watching. Mara didn't flinch. She had anticipated this. Every movement she'd made during the avalanche, every improvised shot, had been with this moment in mind. She tracked subtle shifts in snow, the faint outline of a figure frozen against a rock. Her sidearm felt tiny in her hands, but she didn't need a rifle now. The first helicopter hovered nearby, downdraft tearing at the slope, snow and ice spraying everywhere. Mara climbed toward the edge, moving with precision despite exhaustion, frostbite, and bruising from the avalanche. She waved the beacon, screaming into the wind, and the pilot adjusted, hovering just long enough for her to signal her position. "Hook me," she shouted, voice ragged. "Fast and cover the convoy." The winch dropped. Mara grasped it with both hands, feeling the vibrations from the helicopter above. The rotors threatened to unbalance her on the slick ice, but she held firm. Slowly, deliberately, she let the line take her weight. Her boots scraped the snow as the winch lifted her off the ridge, muscles burning, heart hammering. From below, the convoy moved cautiously, trucks inching forward through drifting snow. Mara kept her eyes on them, tracking each vehicle as she ascended. The hidden sniper flickered again, a shadow against ice, moving closer to intercept. Mara's mind raced. She couldn't risk drawing fire from the helicopter. She had to stop him herself. She grabbed a small flare from her pack and ignited it, tossing it toward the sniper's last known position. The red light exploded against the storm, drawing his attention. For a split second, he hesitated, caught in the sudden flash, frozen just long enough. Mara aimed her sidearm, squeezed, and fired. The shot rang true, striking a patch of ice beneath his feet. The sniper lost balance, slipping down the slope, sliding out of sight in a cascade of snow and rock. Relief hit Mara in a wave she didn't allow herself to feel fully. The convoy had a clear path. The sniper threat had been neutralized. Her focus returned immediately to the mission at hand. The helicopter winched her higher, finally clearing the ridge. The pilot shouted over the roar of the rotors. "Everyone below is safe for now. Let's get you all out." Mara's pulse slowed just slightly as she scanned the pass below. The convoy was moving, finally free from the chokehold of the mountain. Trucks crept carefully across snow and ice, drivers following instinct and fear alike. Families looked up in awe as the helicopter's shadow passed over, hope shining on frozen faces. The mountain had been conquered, not tamed but survived, and the impossible mission had succeeded. Still, the storm wasn't finished. Blasts of wind rocked the helicopter, throwing Mara against the harness. She gritted her teeth and held on, eyes flicking down at the shifting snow, nodding every creak and tremor. The mountain remained alive, unpredictable, but the avalanche's fury had passed. A second helicopter appeared, guiding more of the convoy toward extraction. Mara's eyes followed every movement, mentally calculating, ensuring nothing went wrong. Every second counted. One misstep now could undo everything. As she rose higher, frost streaking her face, Mara allowed herself a single glance back at the ridge. Snow swirled in chaotic patterns, rocks jutting from the ice like teeth. The enemy sniper lay neutralized, buried under snow or chased away, the convoy moving steadily, and yet the mountain seemed to breathe, watching, waiting for the next challenge. The pilot shouted above the wind, "You made it, Captain. Everyone's moving." Mara nodded, exhaustion hitting her in waves. Her muscles trembled, frozen, bruised, beaten, but alive. She allowed herself a deep breath, letting it fill her lungs with the bitter cold of victory. Below, the convoy was moving steadily toward safer ground. Families waved, children clinging to parents, faces streaked with tears and frozen smiles. They had survived. Her hands gripped the harness tightly. Years of training, instincts honed in war zones, and a single, ruthless determination had guided them all through the impossible. She thought of the avalanche, the sniper, the wind, the ice, and a fleeting sense of pride washed over her. She had volunteered for the impossible, and she had delivered. The helicopter lifted higher, carrying her toward the clouds and safety, leaving the frozen mountain pass behind. She glanced down once more. The road she had saved lay silent under a blanket of snow, trucks crawling forward like tiny, determined ants. The mountain had tested her. It had thrown every obstacle, every danger, every threat imaginable in her path, and yet somehow she had survived. Command called again through the radio, urgency softening into relief. "Captain Hale, convoy secure. You are clear. Excellent work. You've saved them all." Mara allowed herself a faint, weary smile, letting her head lean back against the harness. She had risked everything, faced death at every turn, stared down the mountain and emerged alive. The impossible had been achieved. But even as the clouds swallowed the helicopter, she knew one truth: mountains remembered. And when the world called the next impossible mission, she would answer. Because some people didn't just survive the impossible, they mastered it. The frozen mountain pass lay behind her, silent, deadly, and conquered. And Mara Hale had lived to tell its story.